Hi, welcome to Shaky Sports Journeys. Thank you for joining us. Here today with the subject to chat about racism in sport. I've got myself a great guest lined up for the show, ex-pro basketball player for the likes of Glasgow Rocks, played for Scotland, played for Team GB, and also recently awarded an MBE. I'm talking about Kieron Achara. How are you, mate?
I'm good, mate. Thanks for having me on.
Pleasure, mate. Pleasure. Before we go any further, now I know any basketball viewers that are looking in will know exactly who you are, but can you just tell me a little bit about what you've done in the sport?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny coming from Scotland playing basketball. It's one of those things that no one really expects. But I guess I was a wee bit back. I started playing basketball at 14, 15. Obviously, really, really tall. Before that, believe it or not, I did played football, rugby, and lawn bowls. But yeah, that's another story. But yeah, I started playing basketball. I was very fortunate, I guess, fast tracked. Went over to a camp when I was 16 in the States, and they started talking about scholarships, and that changed my mind and everything. I didn't know what a scholarship was, and the fact that I could go somewhere, play sport, and get a free education just changed my whole drive. So really kind of started to focus on the game. Went over to the States for 5 years. Actually, I did a year high school, then 5 years in university. Got my degree, continued playing. Then heard about the Olympics was coming. I had no real ambition of going pro until then. But as soon as I found that the Olympics were going to be in 2012, and that would have been about 2007, I think we found out. My mindset just shifted, so I was focused on going pro. Went over to my first year professional in Italy. Then I moved to Spain, Greece, Bulgaria, before coming back to the UK and playing for the Glasgow Rocks. During that time, I got to compete in the 2012 Olympic Games, Commonwealth Games in 2018 with Scotland, 105 caps for GB. Got to captain my country, which was a huge honour. So the sport just propelled, and it was funny because every time coming back home, I was still very humbled because it was just, all right, big guy, do you play basketball? And no one had a clue who I was. So it was quite a nice kind of mix when you're playing overseas and you're getting all signing autographs and seeing everybody and on TV, this and this, and then you come back to Scotland and no one really cared. So it was quite a contrast, but quite humbling at the same time. But yeah, I was really proud of my career. I really, really enjoyed it. And I guess, talking about the MBE, the thing was spurred on from that was what I seen in the rest of the world and seeing how sports was taken seriously and how sports help people gain confidence and everything else. I just felt that we were lacking a little bit of that here. And I guess that's my driving purpose now, to actually help people just feel like they've got some hope and belief, and not to make it as a professional athlete. I understand only 1% go on and do that, which is an amazing achievement in itself, but just get something out of life, how sport can actually help you with other things. I think that's the most important message I try and instill into people these days.
Well, listen, great to hear about that. I'd imagine every time you walked into a room, scouts would have been quite excited before you'd even seen you handle a basketball. You're 6'10", I'm right in saying?
That's the one, 6'10".
I'd imagine a few scouts were smiling at you when you got over to the States.
And again, it was so funny because, obviously in Scotland, it wasn't like you were getting scouted per se. I was very fortunate. I had a good friend of mine, or who became my friend. He was a sixth year pupil who ended up taking the school team and asked me to come along. But the team was made up of mostly rugby players who just played basketball for fun, just thinking from PE and everything else. So yeah, I guess I was quite lucky in that sense that someone understood the sport enough to kind of say, you probably should be trying this out.
Yeah, I don't know if bowls was the game for you, big man.
I can always go back to that. That's what I was saying.
Listen, and plenty of time left. I'm sure you could handle a ball well still, even now. Just on your MBE though, can you just go into a little bit more detail about the kind of work that you've been doing? Because it's obviously community based. It's out. I seen a quote where you were saying it's really humbling to receive something that I've actually done for the community, helping with the community. Just elaborate on that a little bit.
Yeah, so like I said, obviously basketball is my sport, but sport in general, I've done a lot of work with all the active schools and everything else, and it kind of started off at the Rocks, and that's where it's progressing now. It's essentially just going in and doing the basics. You know, I always give the example of going to some schools and asking people what they want to be when they're older. And, you know, a lot of people say like a football player, that's usually the default. And then when you actually delve a little bit deeper, you understand that they're not even playing for a football team. You know, they just say that it's something that they wish they could, but for a lot of people, they generally don't think they can be anything. And some of the areas that we go into is that kind of mindset. So it's just working with organisations specifically to try and instill that kind of confidence within. And then from a Glasgow Rocks perspective, what we've been building on is working on, you know, how can we kind of get this grassroots movement and actually help instill kind of confidence, self-belief. And that's continuing to grow year on year. And, you know, like I said, I am very humbled. I understand there's so many people out there doing so many amazing things. It's just finding a way to kind of give that exposure. But again, the crux of it is it's always about that message for me. And that's why I said sport plays a pivotal role in creating those opportunities. And I guess what we're going to kind of go in a little bit today about for me, it has to be as inclusive as possible, because I genuinely believe that the more people playing sport, the more confidence, more self-belief that people can build on. The problem with a lot of the things that we do is we focus so much on the elite end that a lot of people are getting completely shut out. And I also believe the elite end would improve if more people were participating. So it's one of those situations for me right now. That's it. Like, it's getting a grip on what's going on within the community. Where can I help? You know, using my exposure, even my size, it's an icebreaker for so many, going into schools and just helping with that self-belief build.
Listen, it's brilliant to hear about. It's many congrats again for your recent MBE, and I look forward to seeing what you're going to do next. But it's awesome, mate. It's awesome. Brilliant to see sportsmen like yourself who's been there, done it, looking to give back to the youth. So credit to you, my friend. Obviously, we're here today to talk about racism in sport. Now, this is also obviously very relevant just now. Myself and another Scottish cricket internationalist, Majid Haq, recently spoke out and called for an independent review into institutional racism in Scottish cricket. What did you think what was your thoughts on that when you saw that?
You know what, it was actually quite interesting, because I remember when the whole Yorkshire debacle started, and my first thought was, wow, this is great. It's a bold move. It's very much needed. But at the same time, I was thinking, this is not just a Yorkshire cricket problem. This is, and maybe from yourself, you're thinking, oh, actually, this is not just a Yorkshire cricket, it's a cricket problem. But I would even take it one step further than that. It's the whole sporting infrastructure problem and the wider society. I think it's just magnified within that. So my first thought was it was very bold. I was really proud, because it takes a lot to speak up on certain things, because I completely understand that in very many situations, you're thinking about your family. You're thinking about, you know, am I going to get employed for this? Well, you know, there's a lot of thoughts going in your mind, because you know it's going to get challenged, you know. But at the same time, it also gives you kind of, you know, being a person of colour, it kind of gives you a little bit of hope and belief that, wow, actually, if more people step forward and kind of share their stories and kind of get to the point, they're going to get listened to. So I was very proud that when it was announced. I wasn't shocked, because I understand that this issue does happen. I also was a little bit scared, in the sense that how is it going to get handled? So now there's an investigation, everything else. Is it just going to be the same old that actually, you know, oh, we hear you, but it doesn't really exist, and we move on, you know? So there's that element of fear that's still around, still lingering, you know, who was carrying out the investigation. All these little thoughts were in my head, but at the same time, I was like I said, very, very proud and happy to see those steps being taken.
From your experience, do you have confidence? They're called the independent review team. They're called Plan for Sport. They have, from what I've been told, a panel of 12, I think, from people all from a kind of specialised background and equality and diversity. But I know people are still sceptical out there, that because these things can tend to be brushed under the carpet. What do you think?
You know what? Am I skeptical? I mean, that's always there. because, like I said, I think a lot of people have spoken up in the past, and it's just kind of been brushed to the side. The thing about, for me right now, is like the investigation, in my opinion, is pointless. That sounds awful because I know it exists, you know. So my thought process is actually, like, actually, once you get to that phase, what next? Like, what are the actions to eradicate those things? So, you know, that's me being the pessimist in that situation. The optimist in me is saying, you know, I'm glad it's getting reviewed. I'm glad it's getting media attention as well. I think that puts a little bit more pressure on the situation. But the outcome of this, regardless of how the outcome comes, it's okay, what are the next steps? And that's where, you know, a lot of people are stuck at this moment in time. And, you know, even going a little bit deeper, I was saying that even the term racism, right? You know, I have been working on me in the sense that when I'm calling people out for racism, I'm not calling them a racist. I'm essentially saying what you are saying is racist, or what you are doing is racist, because I believe that then you can change that. I think that when people are called out and called, you know, a racist for whatever, they will give you 5 instances on when they haven't been racist. So it's actually deflecting from the actions that they were doing. So I'm now trying to give people more of the benefit of the doubt to actually start challenging the actions and the behaviours opposed to the person themselves. Because actually, if you think about it from a racist perspective, that's exactly what people are doing with ourselves. You know, they're challenging us as people based on the colour of our skin. You know, and actually, there's a lot of actions and behaviours that are very different to what they, you know, their beliefs. So I was always saying in a sporting context, you know, people saying, oh, you're quite articulate for, you know, for this or what for that, or oh, actually, you're one of the good ones, or that, you know what I mean? So these little digs that it's kind of like, it's supposed to be a compliment, but actually you're completely, the default is a race is inferior to anything else. And actually there's a couple of outliers, opposed to thinking the default is, let's drop the judgment of people. So I was saying right now, if you're an elderly white male, right now the default is bad. You know, it's their time to go. They're dinosaurs or this, but actually, there's a lot of great people from that demographic. But we're making snap judgments the other way. So I'm trying to get away from all of that to actually start questioning the actions and the behaviours opposed to the person themselves. And I think that is the only way we can actually start to make some progress, because in essence, the defense mechanisms can drop a little bit. You know what I mean? Because as soon as you start challenging someone's being, it becomes very, very difficult.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I've noticed that even here, with the cricket stuff going on, that when you do speak about these kind of things, people go into defensive mode. They highlight other things that they think are, you know, overrule what you're saying. But I agree, this is not about, you know, just rolling heads and bashing things down. This is about trying to come together, educate. You know, I think a lot of the time people don't even understand that they maybe are being subtly racist or biased. And you're right, you know, one racist comment or you know, you said racism, it doesn't mean that person perhaps is racist throughout their views in life. You know, it might just be that they've subconsciously said something and not realised. I mean, the Middlesex chairman didn't help the other day when he came out and said what he said, obviously, that, you know, South Asian players, you know, they don't have the time for cricket, which I thought was mental, because every South Asian is pretty much born with cricket in the blood, and then black people don't seem to like cricket. They like rugby better. Again, but maybe that was just his thinking. Maybe he didn't mean it personally, and maybe he just needs educated on it.
And in that situation, it kind of goes back to what I was trying to say before, was there's a generalization. So say, for example, someone speaks to me and they ask me my views on certain things. So say, for example, someone wants me to play cricket and I say, no, actually, I prefer basketball. Then going back and making that general statement, and actually that black, because I'm now representing everybody who is black, and my opinions is, and that's what I'm saying, it's so nuanced, because right now, even, you know, from a basketball perspective, we're doing the, you know, Black Lives Matter. I could tell you majority, there's a lot of my teammates and ex-teammates who are so against, taking a knee, doing this, doing that. So actually, it's very nuanced, because we tend to generalize because it's easy to kind of box what people's opinions are. So say, for example, if they were to go and speak to a white person in that situation and ask them, if they wanted to play cricket, and their parents would say, no, we don't think cricket's the right path. We want them to stay within education and go forward with education. They're quitting at 17. The snap judgment wouldn't be to then generalize and say that all white people want to prefer education to cricket. So you have to sometimes take a step back to say, like, okay, why am I generalizing situations when it's people who are, don't look like me or not from my background? Because it's easy, because actually you probably have more white friends and more understanding, and understand that some people say yes, some people say no, but we try to box everything together, and that's probably the biggest issue right now. So for every voice you'll hear on a supporting like a Black Lives Matter, you could always pull out one person, black person, or just to go against that, and then that's it's then us versus them. So I was saying that what people really have to get to the understanding is that everybody is free thinkers. Every situation is different. So, for example, where I came from in Scotland, growing up, speaking to another black person from London, we've had different experiences in life as well. So don't start just saying this is how how black people think on this situation. This is it's very, very complex. But the main message is that curiosity thing. It's to start thinking about actually what are the barriers, what are the perceived barriers. How, instead of just being deflated and say, well, we can't reach, they're hard to reach. They're not hard to reach. You're just not doing enough work to get into those areas because you don't care enough at this moment in time. So I guess the message from this and talking about institutional racism is, how do we become more inclusive? All right. How do we stop stereotyping and making judgments? And then most of all, making an effort, and not giving up until you achieve your goals. Right now, there's not that emphasis on that. And I go on, I posted something the other day on Twitter about the inclusion piece. And I was mentioning that, right now it's like people are getting invited to the party. All right, okay, we need more people of color. Invite them to training, invite them to this, invite them to that. But actually, once they're invited, you have to work harder to make them feel welcomed. And that welcome piece is still is a long way to go. And that's where you talk about the education, the understanding, the curiosity. All that's missing at this moment in time.
Let's go into another point then, off the back of what you've just said, tokenism. Tokenism, for me, is bringing a person from a BAME background, sitting them in a chair and telling the outside world that, no, we're not institutionally racist. We've got this man or woman. They're here. They're at the table, so we can't be. But from listening to some people that have been in those situations and in those chairs over the years, they've found that they can't really inflict any change. Their voices aren't really heard. What's your thoughts on tokenism?
It's the in thing at this moment in time, and to the point that it's become so much of them thing is when I'm getting offered opportunities, when I'm starting to second guess, is it because of my skill set or is it because of how I look? And the reality is it's probably a bit of both. And I went to study in the States, and I know all about affirmative action back in the day and quotas and all the rest of it, and I know how it actually made some steps in the right direction, but at the same time there was a lot of people questioning and self-doubt. I think tokenism is at the heart of everything right now because it's the easiest thing to do. It's a quick fix and it's aesthetically pleasing. You can see it, you can put it on a photo, you can interview the person at work and talk about their experiences and how happy they are and everything else and how inclusive we are. But actually, inclusion, equality, equity, it takes time, and that's what I'm saying, that from a black person wanting change, I have to understand that there has to be an infrastructure in place for that change to occur. You can't just appoint, here's new black coaches, here's a new black board member, here's a South Asian board member, we've got a woman now, we've got a disabled person, everything's great, and we move on. Actually, those people are crucial, because if they are then listened to and understanding, but it's the connection to these communities. And I was saying that right now there's a lack of trust. So I was saying that if every cricket club right now in Scotland was to say, come, we're welcoming, I don't think everyone would go, because there's still a lack of trust, and trust takes time. So how do we go into the communities, working on in their settings to start off with, build that trust, ask the questions? Because I was talking about those barriers before. I'll give you an example of me when I was younger. This is not from a race perspective. This is from I guess it was a social class perspective. We used to have fast cricket come into our school. Mr. Bond, great guy in Stirling, really, really enthusiastic, made everyone want to play, and, back then it wasn't like you could go and Google and look at their clubs and everything else. I walked, it's probably about 25 minutes from my house to the local cricket club, and took one look at the cricket club and said, that's not for me, I wouldn't fit in, right? I must have been about 11 years old at the time.
And why did you feel that way, Kieron?
Because and that's exactly, I was reflecting on this a little while ago. I was, from an estate in Stirling, and in my mind it was all rich white kids, and they wouldn't want me there, and that was my judgment. No one said anything to me. No one didn't, say, you're welcome. It was, I already had this perceived judgment in my mind. So that got me thinking that a lot of people must feel the exact same way about those situations. And, that's not the fault of the cricket club at that moment in time, because they didn't even know. I hadn't spoken out. I hadn't said this. I hadn't even given it a try. So how can we kind of come to a position that, we're actually educating ourselves to say, no, actually we can fit in, right? We are welcomed, but at the same time, there has to be the effort from those clubs to say, we want you here. This is what we'll do. This is how we make you feel. And I was saying that a lot of that comes with influencers. I was saying that, say if Mr. Bond had taken us up to the cricket club that day, and there was 5 of us going, right? That would have been a safe person who I trusted, who I followed, who was enthusiastic with the sport, that would help me into that environment. Same thing with basketball. I went from school to after school club, asking to go to a club in Falkirk, didn't want to go. My coach then from the after school club was then the coach in the Falkirk club, and that was my safety. We don't have enough influencers or safety nets within our communities in those positions to entrust people from different backgrounds. So there needs to be a big movement and shift from the coaching infrastructure, everything else, to be more inclusive in that sense, to actually make people feel comfortable to go into that environment. But those influencers then can't just ignore the communities that they were working in before. They have to still be working within those communities to bring kids through the pathways. And we always talk about pathways. There's a good friend of mine down in England, in Sport England, who's saying that, Chris Grant, who mentioned pathways. He's saying pathways are great, the elite sport, pathways. But what are the gateways into those pathways? How do you actually get onto the pathway in the first place? And you'll know in every instance right now, from a grassroots perspective, how diverse it is at grassroots, and then the elite pathway completely changes. Right? That's not just in cricket; that's in many sports as well.
Is that similar? Is that similar in basketball?
But yes, yes. It was from definitely, because what I see in basketball would be it was quite weird actually. So I'll give the English example. English primary school level, very diverse. Then you go into club level, it started to change. English selection was very different. But then we had the GB team, which was actually separate from the English. And actually the GB team was pretty much majority black, but all those players hadn't represented England. It was like a really, really kind of weird mix, because what happened was there was some influencers, especially in London and Brixton to be precise, and those players went on to the States, developed outside of the British pathway in essence, became professionals, and then were invited back to camp. So they actually never went through the actual pathway. But what I'm saying is, it was community people helping upskill and giving them opportunities and show them other paths outside of Britain to achieve those goals. And I was saying that right now, our pathways right now, and I'm not saying it, there's a right or wrong, or it's intentional. I think it comes along to what you're talking about earlier on, about that, the subconscious bias, everything else. Usually you gravitate to what you know and what you feel comfortable with, and actually different cultures, different beliefs, different ways of working kind of challenges you, makes you feel uncomfortable. That could be then perceived as a negative thing, like they're a disruption, they're this or that, and that happens a lot in sport. And if you look at our model, it's very volunteer based, and actually to be able to volunteer is a huge privilege in itself. To be able to afford to give up time to then take, money talks. It's usually more affluent people who can actually afford the time to volunteer and give back in different situations. So again, there's a lot of that at play. That it's quite, from a Sports Scotland perspective, it's something that needs to be looked at. Actually, if you look at the coaching infrastructure, we're so dependent on volunteers. Well, actually, what do those volunteers look like? Why are they volunteering? Well, actually, they just want to be around their kids. They want to, they're giving back. I have a lot of respect for that situation, but at the same time, then there's maybe educational pieces that need to be done in that situation too, working with those coaches, those influencers, those leaders, to make sure that they're actually thinking inclusive at all stages, and that's something, again, I think that they were missing, and something, to be fair, is starting to get is in the peripheral right now, and actually something that Sports Scotland have been working on.
That's good. It's good to hear. Lots of food for thought there. I come back to something you said earlier on. You said it's great that we've spoken out, and it's great that we're trying to raise awareness on this issue. But you said something that was interesting. We shouldn't even have to have an independent review. What you want to see is more action. I agree. I know it exists. You know it exists. So my next question was going to be: do you think there needs to be independent reviews across all sports in Scotland? Or I think your answer to that will be more on actions. But if it's not highlighted in other sports also, will the actions be taken? That's my concern.
So I do. I think it needs to be a more holistic approach, and I think that there has been attempts at that. I look at that Tell Your Stories movement, and we tried to gather all the intel throughout all the home nations and the review came back exactly the same, that racism does exist. Oh, shock horror. And then it was like, okay, where are the actions to get put in place? And there was actually quite an infrastructure put in place, but I don't know where that's went. This is something my boss had said to me the other day, and it was very touching, because it's so true that we are reliant on the media to kind of portray and tell the story, right? But that gets boring after a while, and they're onto something else. Racism doesn't stop. It doesn't, it doesn't just come in January and then actually for the next few months it stopped. But actually our actions of what we do works exactly like that. There'll be a reaction in January because something's came out, and then it dies down till it's then brought up again. I was speaking to a professor recently, and he was mentioning to me about just historically how things tend to happen. So there's usually a massive reaction, outrage, everyone's shocked. There's then steps that are taken to try and fix the problem. Those steps are never really drastic enough. They're just they just are enough to kind of keep people happy, and it dies down and goes back to where it was before, till the next wave comes and the next outrage happens and something, So actually, there needs to be a step that actually, here's the plan in place, and it's constantly challenged. And I was saying that's from a Sports Scotland perspective, that's from a club perspective. They're constantly questioning their things, because I was saying that we are very hypocritical in our own sense. So right now, I feel attacked, racist abuse, right? I've been attacked, feel racist. It's ridiculous. It should never have happened. But then I think about the locker room, and I think about the homophobic things that are said and the misogynistic things that are said. And I'm not challenging those things. So how say that the way I feel that's an outrage, but actually all these other things are happening too. So we have to constantly think about how can we be more inclusive? How can we be more this? How can we be more, less judgmental? I don't think we do that enough. I think we just fixate on one little thing and trying to fix that when actually it's a wider issue. So all forms of discrimination are wrong, but we constantly do that every single day of the week. So we have to challenge ourselves internally first, but also the infrastructure from a sporting body. There's a duty of care to make sure that they're instilling that and holding people accountable at all stages.
Very interesting, Kieron. As we come to the back end, my last question to you is, what type of actions do we need to eradicate, not just racism, as you say, all forms of discrimination? What do actions actually look like?
Yeah, and that's a great question. And actually, if I could answer that, I'd probably get paid a lot of money. But yeah, I think first and foremost, all right, we have to accept that change is needed. Right. Not only that, there's the population. If I'm looking at Scotland right now, is changing. It's becoming more diverse. We have to understand that integration is not the key. Right. There's an element of helping people adapt in their culture, but at the same time, the fault of what we think our culture is right now, we have to be open enough and adapt and evolve, because that's what happens. Right. It's a continuum. It's constantly changing. So the way to do that is to understand that change is inevitable, right? Understanding is crucial. So understanding different cultures, understanding, like I said, the barriers that exist, that all takes time. And that comes back to that whole educational piece. From an accountability perspective, right, that zero tolerance rule of actually, people who say, direct racism, that's definitely not going to happen. That's never going to be accepted, all right? When I'm looking at reviews, independent reviews, giving an example in the States, reports of racism, you're reporting it to a whole group of white men. That can't, from a subjective perspective, it's so hard. It's so
they just can't get it. They just don't. They're not going to get it. So
the independent review is crucial, but what I'm saying is the selection of the people on that independent reviews is, and I think the main issue that we need right now is we don't have something like a kick it out in Scotland. We have Show Racism Red Card, we have LEAP, we have some other groups who are doing a great job. We have to come more collectively together and actually start challenging and together. It has to be more unified. So that's where I stand. I think for me, the educational piece is crucial. The understanding that the society is changing is crucial. That education, the leaders to understand, and also changing the infrastructure for recruitment. Because right now, if we're saying that we need to recruit, be more diverse in our thinking, well, why weren't we before? So clearly the recruitment model in the first instance was broken. There was something wrong with that. And I don't know how that looks just yet, but that definitely has to be getting challenged.
It's going to be interesting to hear some of the feedback that comes out of this, because you've made a lot of great points, but very fair and very balanced. We aren't out here to, harm people or to cause. We just want to see a more inclusive environment for everybody. But sometimes you need to go through some uncomfortable conversations, and things need to come out before that you can move forward, and you need to be willing to learn. I think the willing to learn piece is crucial. Acceptance and then willing to learn. And if people are willing to do that, you have to embrace it. We shouldn't close. We shouldn't just have an opinion, or it's been like that before, so it's always going to be like that. Yep. You need to give people a chance to change for a positive direction. It's been good to chat to you, mate. I was thinking out the box. I was thinking, you came to a cricket club once and you maybe didn't feel that welcome. Maybe this summer, come down to a cricket club. I'll be sure to invite you. Pop in. I'd love to see you with a cricket bat in your hand. Maybe I can take you on one-on-one in a basketball court sometime.
Brilliant. I would absolutely love that.
Listen, let's do something this summer. So. Let's do something this summer. I'll bring my stilts with me though, mate, because I'll be struggling to shoot anything past that arm just in front of my face. But it's been a pleasure. I'll catch you for a few minutes at the end. But thank you very much for joining me, Kieron.
No problems. Cheers.